Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to part 2 of the in-depth beginner's guide for absolute beginners to raid Shadow Legends. Today's video is going to be almost exclusively about gearing your champions. I think that it is very important to understand at least the basics of how to put gear on your champions. It is arguably the most important thing to understand about the game. And if you watched the last video in the series, uh, we talked a little bit about hitting walls as you're trying to do certain things, and one of the things that you need to learn to diagnose is the gear on your champions. So I'm going to introduce you to the system today. Now, of course, there will be much more to it than we go over here today, but I'm trying to keep this as simplified as possible so that even someone brand new to the genre can understand and apply it, okay? So if you're a new player and you haven't seen the first video, I would highly recommend that you go watch it. We're going to follow up on some things that we talk about in the first video. And if you don't have that context, you might not understand what I'm saying some of the time. So I would advise you to go watch that if you haven't seen it yet and you are a new player. It'll be carded in the top right of the screen and also linked down below and part of this playlist. So let's get into it. Let's talk about why it's important as it applies to you right now as a new player based on what we talked about in the last video. We talked about getting through the campaign. I said that finishing the brutal campaign was the first big thing you're trying to accomplish. It's your first big milestone as a new player. It's your top priority. You need to get through the brutal campaign before you kind of transition into the rest of the game. Finishing the brutal campaign is not really that bad. You're running your 4 best champions. You've been putting the gear on your champions as you've been getting it. And even if it's not great gear, even if it's not applicable gear, finishing brutal is really not that bad. But you'll notice each chapter has these 3 gold stars here on my account. On yours, a lot of these chapters will probably not have 3 gold stars. A lot of them will have 1. Some of them might have 2. But you'll hear people refer to 3-starring the campaign. This is what they're talking about, getting 3 gold stars on every chapter. Up through Nightmare ultimately, but again, in the same way that finishing Brutal was your first big milestone, 3-starring Brutal is one of the next milestones you need to be focusing on. So after you've finished it, you want to come back and start 3-starring it. Now, you'll notice there are stipulations. The stipulations are always the same. You get 1 star just for beating the stage. You get 2 stars for beating the stage with none of your champs being dead at the end of it. And I word it like that because if you have a reviver and someone dies, as long as they get revived at the end and everybody's alive when you win, it counts as no losses. It counts as no one dying. So people can die. As long as they've been brought back and are alive at the end of the fight, it counts. To 3-star stage, you have to do it with 2 or less champions, and they all have to be alive at the end of the run, right? This is where it gets kind of tricky, especially up in Chapter 12 on Brutal. The boss is pretty tough there. It's tough to do this with 2 champions. So you'll probably be using your Kale. You'll probably be running whoever you chose as your starter champion. And then a support. Generally, Deacon is a pretty solid option. Maybe some of you used a promo code or a link that gave you Deacon. He's really good. Apothecary is a great rare. It can be done fairly easily with him as well. But generally somebody that's making it a little bit easier on your starter champion to stay alive, supporting them in some way. And again, it's a little bit more difficult. So the gear becomes more important. So I want to make sure that you understand gear, at least at a basic level, so that you can apply it, make your champions as strong as they can be for where you're at, and be good to go, okay? So let's talk about kind of the anatomy of a piece of gear and some of the things to be aware of as far as how the gear is structured. And then we're going to get a little bit more in depth and start talking about the stats and all of those things. So if I click on this piece of gear, you'll notice that it says it's an epic piece. It has a purple border. If I click on a gold piece, it'll have a gold border and be legendary. A blue piece is rare. Same thing as the champions, right? Gray is common. Green is uncommon. Blue is rare. Purple is epic. Red is legendary. I'm sorry, orange is legendary. Red is mythical. We're not going to talk about mythical gear because it's going to be a little bit before you see it, but this is what a piece looks like. Again, we're not going to talk about that right now because it's not applicable. But everything up through legendary is applicable. You will see legendary gear. Aside from the rarity of the gear, and we'll talk about what the rarity means for the piece of gear in a second, but there's also a star rating, all the way from 1 to 6 stars, the same as champions, right? The star rating dictates the value of the stats on the piece. So let's filter this out a little bit. Let's go with a weapon. And let's go with 5 and 6-star weapons. Okay. So you see here we've got a 5-star weapon. The value is 25. If we come to the 6-star weapon, the value is 35. And then every time we level it up, that's going to go up. Okay. The main stat will go up every time we level up the piece of gear. So if I open this up and I upgrade 1 level, it tells you where it's going to go. It's going to be 46 now. Whereas the 5-star piece starts at 25. If I level it up, it goes to 35. So it starts out less and it goes up less incrementally every level. So you could see why 6-star gear is ideal. 6-star gear is definitely what you want to have because it applies to the value of the main stat and the substats. What I mean when I say that is you'll notice, let me slide myself over just a little bit more here. If we look at this weapon, it tells you what it is. It tells you the rarity. You can see the star rating. You can see what level it is. Next to it here, this is the main stat of the piece. Sorry, right here. Okay? If any piece we click on, there's going to be a stat up there. So on the helmet, you see this is a flat HP. If we click these gloves, that's crit rate. That's the main stat. All right? Everything under that is called a substat. And this is where the rarity comes into play. The star rating, again, decides the value of the substat, and then the potential for the value of each roll of the substat. Now, if we find pieces of gear that are not leveled up, let's say, I don't know if I have any 4-star, but it doesn't matter. Let's start with blue because I don't have anything less. You'll notice every piece of blue gear that I click, regardless of star rating, is going to inherently have 2 substats. Okay? Every single one I click that's not leveled up past 8. Everyone that's not leveled up at all is going to have 2 substats. Every rare piece of gear inherently starts with 2 substats. If it was a gray piece of gear, it would have none. If it was a green piece of gear, it would have 1. Blue piece of gear has 2. Purple piece of gear starts with 3. And a legendary piece of gear starts with 4. And 4 is the max. 4 is the most substats you can have on a piece of gear. This is important because as you level up a piece of gear, something happens to the substats every 4 levels. Whatever's already there will get rolled first, incrementally every 4 levels. So I hope I'm keeping this simple. Let's level up this piece of gear. Now, we've got our main stat that's going to go up every single time we increase the level. And then we have our substats that are going to be affected every 4th level. Now, since speed and resistance are already on this piece of gear, that means at level 4, either this speed or resistance is going to get an extra roll, okay? So let's take it up to 4. So our resistance got an extra roll here. Now, since there were 2, at level 8, another one of these is going to get a roll again. So we got 2 rolls into our resistance. Now they're done. They can't be rolled anymore. Now when I take it to 12, we're going to get a new substat in this 3rd slot. And then when I take it to 16, we're going to get a new substat. So that's the best we can do. The best you can do on a rare piece of gear is a double. You'll hear people talk about doubles and triples and quads. That's what they're talking about. We got a double roll into resistance here. That's the best we could have done. You cannot get a triple roll on a blue piece of gear. If we come and switch our rarities that we're looking at here to epic, you see we have 3 substats. So if we take it to 4, we got to roll into one of the stats that's present. We take it to 8, we got to roll into one of the stats that's present. We take it to 12, we're going to get a roll into one of the stats that's present. And then at 16, we get our new stat. So you see how that starts to make sense? That's why a legendary piece of gear has so much potential when you get it, because you can theoretically get 4 rolls into the same stat, generally speed being the most sought after. So we could take this to 4. Now it can hit any stat because it's all full, right? So that's kind of a double-edged sword. That can be real good for you, or it can be real bad for you. And a lot of the time it'll be real bad for you. You know what I mean? But that's where the RNG comes into the system, okay? So again, you might have to jump back and listen to that a couple of times to differentiate the star rating and the rarity, how all that works. But that's kind of the anatomy of the structure of a piece of gear, okay? We're beginning a new section now. We're going to start talking specifically about stats because it's also important to understand stats and how they work on gear, okay? So that you don't look for things that don't exist. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to waste a lot of time there. So again, this is a new section. If you don't understand what we just talked about, go back and listen to it again because it is important to understand. Perhaps less important than what we're about to talk about, but still. Now, this is a graphic that I've put together that I hope is going to be helpful. There will be a link to it down below in the description so that you can go download it and save it to reference so that you don't have to come back to this video every time you want to reference it. But I'm hoping that this will make it a little bit easier to understand what you're looking for when you're gearing a champion. I want you to think of these gear slots in 3 different rows: top row, middle row, bottom row, okay? Because they're structured a little bit differently, you'll notice that the blocks attached to all of them look a little bit different. So there's a reason for that. So we're just going to start with the top row and work our way through, okay? Starting with the weapon, this box. Everything above the black line is what's possible as the main stat. You'll notice there's only one stat. That means that attack is the only possible main stat for a weapon. You will never see a weapon that is anything other than attack, flat attack as the main stat, okay? Under the line, everything in yellow is what's possible as a substat. Everything in red is what's not possible as a substat on the top row. Again, don't apply this to the other boxes because they have different rules. But everything top row. So green is what's possible as a main stat. Yellow is what's possible as a substat. Red is what is not possible as a substat. Okay? So again, you will never see a weapon that is anything other than attack as a main stat. Weapons can't have defense or defense percentage as a substat, and they can't have the same substat as the main stat, which means it can't have flat attack as a substat either. Now, we did talk about what flat stats are. In case I didn't talk about flat stats, let me very quickly touch on that again. Flat simply means it does not have a percentage next to it. So you see here we've got attack, and then we've got attack percentage under it. Flat attack is just the one without the percentage. Everywhere that it's possible, you want a percentage stat. There are some stats that don't have percentage versions. Speed, accuracy, and resistance do not have percentages. They are just flat stats all the time. There is no percentage version of it. So anytime that someone tells you you want speed, accuracy, or resistance, that's just exactly what you want. If someone says you want attack on your chest, they mean percentage. Attack, HP, and defense, you always want percentage where it's possible, all right? So moving right along to the helmet is fairly simple. It is always going to be flat HP as a main stat, and then literally everything except flat HP is possible as a substat, so I didn't feel the need to list them all out here. You can get every stat in this game as a substat on a helmet except flat HP because it's already the main stat, and as we said, you can't double up. Defense, kind of the same as a weapon, but in a defensive direction. So you've got always flat defense as the main stat on a shield, and then you can't have attack or attack percentage as a substat, but everything else is possible, okay? So that's the top row. The top row is much simpler than the middle row. The middle row is where a lot of the variables come into play. So that's why we've structured the boxes a little bit different. So, middle row. Starting with the gloves, the structure of these boxes, we're just talking about main stats because every stat is possible as a substat on the middle row. So there's no need for a substat info box because everything's possible as long as it's not a duplicate of whatever the main stat is. So these boxes are referring to main stats, okay? In this case, green means this stat is exclusive to this slot. So for the gloves, we have crit rate and crit damage that are exclusive to the gloves, meaning you will never see crit damage or crit rate as a main stat on armor or boots. You will only ever find them on the gloves. Everything that's yellow is also possible, and then everything that's red is not possible. So you'll never see speed as a main stat on the gloves. You'll never see accuracy or resistance as a main stat on the gloves, okay? So green, exclusive to the slot. Yellow, possible in the slot. Red, not possible in the slot. And then again, every stat is possible as a substat as long as it's not a match of the main stat. For the chess piece, accuracy and resistance are the exclusive stats to the slot, meaning you won't see them as main stats on gloves or boots. Everything in yellow is possible. Everything in red is not possible. Okay, you'll never see speed as a main stat on the chest, etc. For the boots, speed is the exclusive stat, and then everything that's yellow is possible. Everything that's red is not possible. Now, when someone says to you, you want to put speed boots on a champion, they're talking about the stat. They will usually double up if they're also talking about the set. But generally speaking, when someone's talking to you about the middle row, they're talking about the stat before they're talking about the set unless they differentiate. So if I tell you, you want to put some crit damage gloves on that guy, I mean the stat. I don't mean the set. There's also a set called crit damage, and that could be kind of confusing if you're relatively new. But understand that the majority of the time, if anybody's talking to you about these three pieces, they're talking about stats before sets, all right? So again, if you are building your damage dealer and you know that you want to have attack on the chest, you always want attack percentage on the chest. You do not want flat attack on the chest. Flat stats on these pieces are not borderline not acceptable unless it's a stat that has no percentage version. So speed, accuracy, resistance. Those are acceptable because they don't have percentage versions, okay? Let's move on to the bottom row. Bottom row is kind of similar to the top row as far as the structure of these boxes, but it's still a little bit different. So everything above the line that's green is what's possible as a main stat. And then everything under the line that's red is what is not possible as a substat. Okay, meaning everything that's not listed here is possible as a substat. But everything above the line are the only things you'll find as main stats. So for rings, for example, flat attack, flat HP, flat defense are all you'll ever see as a main stat for the ring. And then you'll see everything except speed, accuracy, resistance, crit rate, and crit damage as a substat. So basically, all of the stuff that's yellow over here, you'll see as substats on rings, okay? For the amulet, flat attack, flat HP, flat defense, but also crit damage. And a lot of the time, especially on your damage dealers, you'll be wanting crit damage as the main stat. And then everything's possible as a substat except what's listed here in red. For the amulet, flat attack, flat HP, flat defense, and then also accuracy and resistance are possible. And then for the substat, every stat's possible except what's red here. Some key things to note are that you notice speed is not possible on a ring or an amulet, but on a banner it is, which means most of the time, if you have speed on a banner, it's a decent banner. Ideally, you're getting accuracy or resistance banners that have speed, and there are some exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, you want all of your champions to have speed on them. So you'll notice speed is possible as a substat pretty much everywhere, except ring and amulet, and you want to have speed pretty much everywhere that you can have it, okay? Another thing to note when you're gearing your champions, by the time this rule is not true anymore for you, you will know better. So I'm gonna give you this rule to keep in mind. Pretty much every single champion that you build in this game is going to have boots that have speed as a main stat. It's almost exclusively what you're going to put there. Way later, there are exceptions to the rule. But by the time you're there, by the time you have those champs and are using those champs in those ways, you'll know better anyway. So always, pretty much always, use speed as a main stat on your boots. It is very important that your champions have speed, okay? So, again, this graphic will be listed I'm sorry, linked down below if you want to just go have it to download and reference. And then if you need to understand the graphic a little bit better, you can come back here and watch this section of the video again. But I hope that lays it out a little bit for you. It's a lot. I know that it's a lot of information, and it gets more complex than we've talked about because we haven't even really talked about sets and stuff. I just want you to understand what you're looking at with pieces of gear. And then the sets you can use as you see fit. You have to experiment a little bit. One quick thing I'll say about the sets is you'll notice they have a parentheses with a number in them. That's the amount required to complete a set. So a life set, a champion needs to be wearing 2 pieces of this gear to get this bonus. They do stack. So if a champion is wearing 4 pieces of life, they're getting a 30% bump to their HP. If they're wearing 6 pieces, they get a 45% bump to their HP. So the 2 set pieces do stack. And then, of course, you can put a 4-piece set and a 2-piece set on a champion and get the effects of both. So like Lifesteal, for example, that's going to be a very popular set for you as you're progressing through the game. A champion needs to be wearing 4 pieces of this to get the effect, okay? So keep that in mind. It is not mandatory that you complete sets on your champions. I probably have quite a few champions. She's a good example. This is Wither. She's one of our, without question, my strongest support. You'll notice she happens to have a set completed, a righteous set. You see here we've got set info. There's only 1 completed set, but it makes more sense for me to just put the best pieces that I have on her and not get too hung up on sets. So if I tried to force her into a set, she'd be a lot worse than she is right now. So don't get too hung up on completing sets. Worry more about stats. Don't not put speed boots on someone for the sake of completing a set. You know what I'm saying? Don't put a flat attack chess piece on somebody for the sake of completing a set. It's much more important to get stats in the right pieces. And then as your account grows and develops and you get more gear, it'll be a little bit easier for you to complete sets with also good pieces. You know what I mean? For example, my Vlad here, my damage dealer, I was able to get him in a Savage set because I have applicable pieces for him. But if this was a flat attack chess piece, it wouldn't matter that he was in Savage because he'd be doing so much less damage anyway. I'd still be sacrificing damage. So don't get too hung up on completing sets right now. Worry about stats. Stats are way more important than sets in most cases, okay? So I think that's a good place to wrap up the gear section. If you have any questions, of course, let me know. I have a Discord linked below. You can jump in there and holler at. There's a lot of people in my community that are very willing to help new players out, and I'm around as well too. So you can hop in there and ask some questions if something isn't clear enough. But hopefully this was easy enough to follow. The next video in the series will be more similar to the first one, and that will probably be covering more topics. It'll probably be a longer video like the first one, but being that this one is so much to try to absorb, I figured it was better if we just focus on it for now, and then next video we'll get back to some broader stuff. But again, that's it. We're gonna get out of here. I do hope it was helpful. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you in the next one.